For more of this kind of content, you can subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment. Charles didn't do rescues, but when he heard the sharp crack of an energy bolt slice through the jungle air, his instincts kicked in before logic. Caught up, he moved fast. He found them in a clearing, 3 green-skinned attackers closing in on a woman who stood back to a thick-rooted tree. She didn't scream, jaw set in defiance. He admired that, right before he dropped the first 2 attackers. With clean shots to the chest, the third turned too slow. Charles lunged, slammed the butt of his rifle into his skull. Silence followed. She didn't thank him. Instead, she stepped forward. "You shouldn't have interfered," she said. "Yeah," Charles replied, holstering his weapon. "I had it handled," she said. "Sure you did." He eyed her frame. Her skin was a smooth green, not human. "Who are you?" he asked without looking back. "You'll find out." She walked past him, hips swaying like she owned the entire damn jungle he followed against years of operating solo and staying out of trouble, but something about her. She led him through a narrow pass thick with hanging moss and strange flowers, until the trees opened to reveal something he didn't expect. Just a stone structure. No crystal spires. No science fiction nonsense. Guards flanked the wide entryway, green-skinned and armored. Stiffening at the sight of her, they bowed. Charles stopped cold. "You really don't know who I am, do you? Should I?" She stepped close. "I'm Queen Sivera," she whispered, "and you just saved my life." She stepped away and strode inside, her voice echoing back with dangerous promise. "Follow me, mercenary. I owe you something, personal." Charles followed her in without a word. The palace interior was cool and shadowed, a hard contrast to the jungle heat. Outside, no gleaming alien metals, no shimmering tech. Just stone carved and deliberate, shaped by hands that didn't believe in luxury. She didn't glance at the guards that flanked the entrance, didn't pause as servants bowed low to her from the shadows. Eyes never daring to rise, she led Charles down a wide corridor, walls etched with what looked like battle scenes. Queens with weapons drawn. Blood spilled in stone relief. Every image had one figure larger than the rest. Always her just a massive stone temple. More war council than royal comfort, and a sunken lounge set off to the side. Sivera turned and leaned. "Against the table you killed 3 elite scouts with no hesitation," she said finally. Why? Charles shrugged. "They had weapons. You didn't seem simple. No mercenary does anything simple without a price. I didn't say I was cheap, didn't say you were." She shot back, "But I don't repay life debts with coin." He narrowed his eyes. "Then what's the going rate these days for saving a queen?" She stepped closer. "I give what I choose, and I never choose lightly." He could smell her now. "No one touches me without permission," she said. "You did. You grabbed my arm, pulled me up. You were bleeding." "Still," she whispered, "you touched me." Charles didn't flinch, and I liked. Her hand rose and landed lightly on his chest. "I repay my debts in full," she said, "but I don't give gifts, I give challenges. Not here to play games." Charles said. She leaned up. "Oh, this isn't a game. I don't play, I conquer." Then she turned and walked away, calling over her shoulder without looking back, "You'll stay the night." He didn't move. Instead, hours later, he stood at the balcony of a guest chamber, far too lavish for a mercenary. A soft knock broke his focus. Then the door opened without waiting for his response. Sever stood there. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "I told my attendants I was meditating," she said, walking toward him. "I'm guessing that's Ailey." "Guess again." She stopped close enough that he could feel the heat radiating off her skin. "You saved me," she said. "You looked death in the eye and didn't flinch. You didn't ask who I was. You didn't beg for reward. That's rare. I don't like owing rare men anything. You're not used to being denied, are you?" Her laugh was quiet, dangerous. "I'm not used to being touched." She reached up. "Until today." Charles caught her wrist gently but firmly, his voice low, careful. Her gaze flared. "Why do you think I'm fragile?" "No," he said. "I think I am." And then the tension snapped. Her lips were on his. He responded the only way he knew how, hands tangled. He shoved her against the wall hard enough to make her gasp and grin. She loved it, so did he. They didn't speak after that. The night burned slow, and hard clothes vanished. When it was over, they lay tangled in silence, sweat cooling between them. "You still think this is a game?" he asked. She turned her head, eyes half-lidded. "I think she said slowly. You're a very dangerous man, and you're not done with me yet. She smiled. Not even close. Cra didn't sleep. Queens didn't get that luxury. She lay with her back to him, the faint rise and fall of her breathing. The only sign she was still in the room. Charles sat up on the edge of the bed he'd had meaningless nights before this, was something else. Something neither of them had planned. It had started as a dominance game. You thinking of running already? She said. Charles didn't turn around, didn't know I was on a leash. You're not. The bed rustled. But you. I remind tonight that was tonight, he said. Finally glancing back, it's morning now. Savor smiled funny. I don't recall dismissing you. He stared at her, still lying there. Elle's body sprawled across the sheets like a goddess who knew damn well the temple was hers. Charles didn't belong to anyone. That was rule one, but he didn't move. I could order you to stay, she said, trailing her fingers across the curve of his shoulder. He caught her hand mid-path, holding it in place. Try it. I like you, she said. You're not afraid of me. Maybe I should be. Maybe. She leaned in, lips brushing the corner of his jaw. But that's why I chose you. He turned toward her fully. Now chose. I saw you land 2 days ago, she said casually. You weren't supposed to be anywhere near my jungle, and yet here you are. Charles blinked once. You're saying the ambush was real? She sat up. But fate, it seems, has a sense of humor. You think this is fate? She laughed. No, I think this is mine. Later that day, they dressed insolence when Charles opened the door. A pair of guards stood waiting. One of them offered a short bow. The Queen requests your presence at midday in the war chamber. Requests. Charles raised an eyebrow. The guard didn't flinch. Her words. Cra stepped beside him, fully dressed now, in a sharp, black tunic that hugged her frame with practiced elegance. She doesn't request things. Charles muttered. She didn't deny it. The war chamber was nothing like the palace's other rooms. A massive circular table stood at its center, embedded with a 3-dimensional map of the territory. Flashing red markers glowing along the borderland. Sivir stood at the head of the table, surrounded by advisors, all of them green-skinned, all of them quiet. The Seek and Charles entered. She was mid-sentence. If they cross again, we meet them with steel, not words. I've tolerated too many incursions, no more. Charles stood off to the side, arms crossed. The power she wore here was different than in bed. One of the generals cleared his throat, eyeing Charles with barely concealed disdain. In this human mercenary, what role does he serve in this council? Sivir didn't blink. He saved my life. Once the general said stiffly, and now he shares your bed. Sivir's head turned. Slowly. Do you wish to question my judgment? Commander V of course not, my queen. She turned back to the table. Good, because this mercenary is no longer just a visitor. He is under my protection. When the meeting ended, Sierra didn't wait for him. Charles followed at a distance until she finally veered down a private corridor away from the others. He caught up, grabbed her arm, and pulled her into an alcove. What the hell is this? He asked, her eyes narrowed. What, you're making declarations in front of your council about me? I meant them. I don't care who you meant. He snapped. You put a target on my back, and now half your court thinks I'm sleeping my way into power. Her smile came slow. Aren't you? Sivir stepped close. You think this is about politics? You think I parade men in front of my generals like some insecure warlord? Then what is this? He demanded. Her eyes bored into his. You touched me, you tasted me, and now you stay. That wasn't the deal. It was never a deal. He stared at her, and for the first time, he realized he might be in deeper than he thought, because the Queen didn't just want a night, she wanted everything. Charles didn't sleep that night either. He lay on the edge of the oversized bed, fully dressed this time, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Sivir, the alien queen who kissed like fire and declared him hers like she was claiming territory. Charles didn't like being claimed, but he also hadn't walked away. That part bugged him more than anything. He rose before dawn, slipping out into the hall with steps silent from years of experience. The guards didn't stop him, didn't even blink, but he felt their eyes on him like invisible chains. The palace gates were just beyond the main court, and then he saw her. Sivir stood there. A thin royal robe clung to her form, dark red with gold trim, parted just enough to hint at curves that had already driven him half crazy. Her hair was slicked back, impossibly perfect. You thought you'd leave before the sun rose. she asked. Charles kept walking. Thought I'd spare you the awkward goodbye, cowardly move for someone who fought off 3 trained killers he stopped 3 steps short of. Her whatever this is, he said, you don't want me, you want control, and I don't do chains. Cross smiled slowly. Who said anything about chains? I've seen what happens to people who get too close to power. They stop being people. I'm not offering you politics, she said. I'm offering obsession. You gave me a taste, Charles, and now you satisfy me. He didn't get the chance to respond because the moment he turned 6, guards stepped into view, not with weapons raised, but blocking the path. They weren't here to hurt him. Charles turned back to her, eyes sharp. This how you keep lovers, Queen? Trap them? No. She walked closer, each step slow and deliberate. This is how I keep warriors. You think I'm a prize? No. She said, you're a challenge and I always win. He stared at her for a long beat. His voice came low, almost a growl. You should be careful what games you start. She stopped in front of him even though they were eye level. Oh, Charles, she whispered. This isn't a game. Then she leaned in. It's a war. That day he didn't leave. She kept him close but not locked up. Instead, she paraded him through her court like a weapon. She'd personally disarmed meetings, rituals, audience sessions, always with him nearby. Her advisors hated it. Her people whispered, and she didn't care. Every time he spoke, she listened. Every time he moved, her eyes tracked him like she was memorizing the way he breathed that night. He didn't wait for her. She found him in her war chamber, alone, leaning over the hollow map, eyes scanning a blinking red perimeter. You planning to fight your way out after all? She asked from the doorway. He didn't look up. Your north border is weak. You've got 3 enemy camps within 30 clicks. I know. Then why haven't you dealt with them? She walked in. Because they're baiting me, trying to pull me out before I'm ready. And you're just waiting? No, she said. I was waiting for you. He met her gaze, finally something hard behind his eyes. You want me to fight for you now? No, she said. I want you to fight with me. That hit different. He folded his arms. What do I get in return? She stopped in front of him, the faintest smile touching her lips. You already got it. And then her hand slid around the back of his neck, fingers threading into his short hair, pulling him down into a kiss that didn't ask. The palace was quieter. The next morning, Charles stood alone at the window, bare-chested, watching the sunrise crack through the jungle canopy behind him. The chamber door clicked open. He didn't turn. You're up early. Siver said I don't sleep well in cages. I haven't locked the door, she said, smoothly walking in. But you posted guards. She ignored that, walked to the table and poured herself a drink from a silver flask. Today I meet with the border command. You'll join me. Charles still hadn't turned that an invitation. She sipped again, and expectation heavenly faced her. You give orders like I work for you. She met his stare unfazed. You work with me, or not at all. I'm not your soldier. No, she said. You're my fire. You burn where I aim you, and right now I need a fire that doesn't ask permission. You don't get to play both sides. Cry. You want the man or the weapon? She looked up at him, unflinching. I want both, but you haven't earned the right to ask me to choose. He reached out, grabbed the flask from her hand, and took a swig. It scorched his throat, but he didn't cough, then set it down hard. You think you own me? He said, voice low. No, she said, stepping closer. I think I need you. And that's worse, the honesty. And that landed harder than any insult. So he didn't. Later, the border outpost buzzed with energy. Cray stood at the head of the command table, flanked by commanders and tacticians. Charles stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching how she commanded a room with 2 words, watching how the men, twice her size, deferred like dogs that feared the leash. Halfway through a debriefing, her chief strategist, Commander V. Should we ask your companion for input, my queen? Or is he only here for morale? It was quiet after that. Then calmly, without a word, she stepped forward and struck V across the face. Hard. Vex staggered, holding his jaw. His eyes went wide. My queen, speak again, Commander, she said coldly, and I'll remove your tongue and replace it with silence. Nobody said a word. Cray turned to the rest of the room. Anyone else feel confused about who speaks at this table? A chorus of quiet, no, my queen. Then her eyes met Charles's. They didn't speak again until nightfall in the training yard after sunset, while he punished a set of wooden dummies with hand-to-hand drills meant to bleed frustration out of his knuckles. You don't have to fight them, he said, without looking at her. I wasn't. He turned. Then what was that display? Carification of, what? That I don't tolerate disrespect. She walked closer, especially not toward things I care about. He stilled. You care now. She didn't smile. I crave that's more dangerous. I won't be a possession. He said, good. She whispered, stepping into him. I want a partner, one who can hold me down when I try to burn the world. He grabbed her wrist. You're playing a dangerous game. He said, her breath hitched, and you love it. This time, when they collided, it wasn't about dominance, this was war, and they were both winning afterward. They lay in the training yard, half-dressed, dirt-streaking, sweat-slick skin. He traced the inside of her wrist with one finger, and for the first time she didn't pull away. You ever get tired of fighting? He asked quietly. She closed her eyes. No, I get tired of being alone, but I'd rather burn than beg. Charles rolled onto his side, pulled her closer. You don't have to do either, he said. The days blurred, routine gave way to ritual, and Charles found himself swept into a rhythm that didn't feel like captivity, but didn't quite feel like freedom either. Each morning he trained with Siver's Royal Guards. Each afternoon, he accompanied her through war meetings, diplomatic receptions, intelligence briefings, and each night was fire and surrender. Every corner of the palace held echoes of them, now hallways where fingers brushed in passing, chambers where they exchanged glances that said, too much, too loud. Too often they were seated side by side in a high council room flanked by nobles and warlords. Hunley spoke when Severa gave them room to breathe. Her power wasn't just political. That night they didn't make it to the bed. He found her on the balcony staring out at the jungle under moonlight. You're quiet lately, she said without turning. You're distracting. He replied. She smirked. Good. He stepped behind her, close enough for his breath to brush her shoulder. You keep pulling me deeper. She turned, and yet you keep coming. As should walk away, then walk. He kissed her instead. It wasn't like before. It was slower. They barely made it. Past the curtains, by the end, they collapsed in a heap. She rested her head on his chest, and for the first time she whispered something he didn't expect. I dream of you. Charles looked down at her. That's dangerous. Yes, she said. And it's not stopping. The next day something changed. She kept him close again, but her touch was less possessive, more protective. She watched him from across council tables, like he was the only one in the room when advisors questioned him. Her eyes narrowed when nobles sneered. Her voice cut them down without effort. And that's what scared him, because he wasn't just staying. He was starting to need her late that night in her quarters. He paced by the fire while she undressed in the adjoining chamber. You ever wonder where this is going? He asked. She stepped out in a dark robe, barefoot, unguarded in a way she never was in public. No, she said softly. I know exactly where it's going. He looked at her. And where is that? She stepped into him, wrapped her arms around his neck. To obsession, he pulled back enough to look in her eyes. That's not a plan. It's not supposed to be. She kissed his jaw. Plans are for people who don't already know how it ends. You think this ends with us walking away? She laughed softly, bitter and beautiful. No. I think it ends with someone bleeding. They didn't sleep. She ran fingers through his hair, slow and gentle. You shouldn't be this close, she whispered. Then push me away. She didn't. Morning came too fast, so did the knock at her chamber door. Kiva rose quickly, wrapping herself in a robe, her tone shifting instantly. What is it? A voice came through the door. Scouts report movement at the northeast ridge. Enemy symbols 50. Maybe more armed. Charles sat up, alert. They both knew what it meant. This isn't a threat. He said it's an invasion. She nodded. Once they want the throne, no, Charles said, rising. They want you. They didn't speak as they dressed. Craw buckled her armored belt, her eyes flicking once toward Charles. His gear was already strapped and loaded, a black rifle slung over his shoulder, sidearm on his hip. The soldier in him had come alive again. You think they'll hit the wall directly? He asked, as they marched toward the command deck. They've waited for the perfect moment, she said. Now they think they can catch me distracted. His jaw tightened. They're not wrong. Her hand brushed his lightly. No, they're not. The palace pulsed with movement. Guards hustled into position. War banners were lowered from balconies and watchtowers buzzed with messages from scouts scattered. Through the jungle, the war room was alive with tension maps lit up with red zones and troop markers. Advisors marked numbers and predictions. But the moment Sivir entered, the chaos folded inward. All eyes went to her. Charles stood just behind her. Feck, the old commander she'd once slapped for disrespecting him, gave a subtle nod. Now, the enemy force is smaller than expected, V reported. But they're disciplined and they're not marching, they're hunting. Sivir leaned forward, hands on the edge of the table. What's their target? They haven't hit supply lines, no interest in outposts. It's not a conquest. Charles stepped closer. It's an extraction, V frowned, meaning. Charles looked at Sivir. They're not here for the palace, they're here for you. Silence thickened the air that night. She couldn't sleep. Not because of the enemy beyond the walls, but because Charles wasn't in her bed. He'd returned to his guest quarters. Without a word, leaving only a look behind, she stood on the balcony. A blade strapped to her thigh, footsteps approached behind her. I thought you left, she said without turning. It should have, Charles answered. But I didn't. She turned to him. You want to say something? She said. Say it. I don't know what this is anymore. She stepped toward him. It's real, is it? His voice cracked. Because I feel like I'm just part of the performance now. You think I'm using you. I think you don't know what to do with someone who pushes back. He said you call it obsession, but it's control. You pull me close, then hold me at arm's length. You want me when it burns, but never when it's quiet. Her eyes flashed. That's not fair. Then she stepped close again. You think I don't feel it too? He didn't answer. She grabbed his face with both hands, pulled him down to her mouth, and kissed him when she pulled back. Her voice dropped to something ragged. You walk away now, she said. You'll carry this for the rest of your life. I already will. Then he turned, walked toward the door, and for the first time since she'd met him, she let him go. Charles didn't make it to the outer corridor because he heard the alarm. A single shrill wail split the air. Then came the voice, enemies breaching Sector 3. Repeat breach confirmed, defensive perimeter compromised, but as he rounded the corner into the northern hall, what he saw made his blood go cold. They were already inside, dozens of them, slim armor, tribal markings, blades in both hands, moving silent and fast through the shadows like ghosts heading straight for her chamber. He didn't hesitate. He cut 3 of them down before they knew he was there. The rest scattered, and in that moment he wasn't her lover, he was her weapon. He found her already in motion, 2 guards down at her feet, sword in hand, fury on her face when she saw him. She didn't smile, but she met him with a nod, and together they fought. When the last attacker fell, the hall was thick with smoke and blood. Cry turned, chest heaving, arm cut and bleeding, but her eyes locked on him. You came back, she said. I didn't leave. I thought I could let you go, she whispered against his neck. But I lied. Charles closed his eyes. Me too. The enemy was defeated, but not destroyed. They'd retreated fast and clean. This hadn't been about conquest. It had been a message: you are vulnerable, you are not untouchable. Charles stood beside her at the head of the table, blood drawing on his collarbone. Your enemies won't stop, he said. They know you care about something now. She looked at him. No, she said. They know I care about someone. They had 2 hours before the second wave hit. That's what the scouts said. But Charles didn't believe it. Enemies didn't announce themselves with clean time frames. They struck when you bled, and Sivir's kingdom was bleeding. Now Charles stood over the war table with VC and the other generals, watching the holographic projections flicker and shift. Enemy formations were moving, faster than expected, east and west at once. Pull the jungle guards from the southwest ridgeline, Charles said, eyes locked on the moving red markers. They're baiting us with that light artillery on the north wall. They want you to overcommit. V grunted. They want her. We already had that talk, Charles said, cutting him a glare, and they're not getting her. Cry entered the chamber like thunder. They'll breach the outer gate in less than 40 minutes, she said. We hold here. He moved to her side, voice low. You don't have to carry this on your own. She didn't look at him. I'm a queen, I do know, he said, sharper than he meant. You choose to. You said you didn't want to be a possession, she said quietly. And I'm not, he replied, but I'm not a bystander either. She turned to him. Then fight beside me, not behind me. He stepped close. enough that no one else could hear what he said next. I already am the attack hit before the sun rose. Charles led the outer line himself, rifle tight to his chest knife strapped to his thigh. The palace courtyard had been transformed into a war zone. Barricades mounted, blasters and close-quarter kill zones, and he was in the middle of it all. Sivir stood on the high steps, armor gleaming, sword drawn. Her voice rang out over the chaos, giving orders with terrifying precision. She was no longer just a queen, and Charles knew that's what they were after. The enemy fought like they had nothing to lose. Wave after wave charging. The barricades throwing bodies forward like sacrifice meant glory. Charles ducked under the blast of a grenade, rolled behind. Cover came up, firing. Sector 9 breached, a voice screamed through the comms. Severa's hall is exposed. He moved. He found her in the upper corridor. Sword-stained face cut. 3 enemy soldiers lay at her feet. Back already, she said between breaths. He grabbed her arm. This isn't the moment to be stubborn. I don't run, Charles. I'm not asking you to run. I'm asking you to survive another explosion. Rocked the floor beneath them. He grabbed her waist and pulled her out of the line of the collapsing arch just as it gave way. Behind them, they fell hard, her on top of him, both covered in dust and smoke. Still think you're not mine, she whispered. He pulled her closer. I'm starting to think we don't belong to anyone but this. She kissed him like the world was ending. They fought side by side for the next hour. Every inch of the palace floor was claimed and reclaimed in blood. Sivir's guards held the inner gate. Charles found himself dragging wounded from the lines between reloads. His hand bled. His ribs were cracked. He didn't care, because every time he looked across the battle and saw her swinging, screaming, standing, he felt it again, that burning thing he hadn't named yet. Something bigger than desire, bigger than rage. The final push came at sunset. The enemy tried one last coordinated assault. 3 fronts, a suicide wave to break the core. It almost worked, until Sivir mounted the outer wall herself. She leapt down into the fray like death wrapped in armor blade. A blur, eyes blazing with fire that terrified the men around her, more than any army ever could. Charles followed, and together they ended it. By the time the last soldier fell, the jungle was silent again. Sivir stood in the middle of the courtyard, blood drying on her face, her chest rising and falling, in hard, shallow breaths. Charles walked to her, limping, hurt. He just reached for her hand, wrapped his fingers around hers, and she held on. That night they didn't go to her chambers. They sat by the fire in the war hall, the place where they'd once fought with words instead of weapons. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I should have died today, she murmured. He exhaled slowly. You didn't. Her fingers traced the back of his hand. You were right. You know about what? I don't want control. Her voice cracked. I just didn't know how to let someone fight beside me without it feeling like weakness. It's not weakness, he said. It's trust. She nodded. They sat there for a long time. Then she said the one thing that neither of them had dared speak until now. I don't want you to leave. He didn't answer right away then. I wasn't planning to. She looked up at him. You belong to me now, she whispered. Charles met her eyes and smiled. Yeah, he said. I think I always did. The palace was quiet after the blood, the fire, the screaming. It felt wrong, as if silence itself was holding its breath, waiting to see if anything could survive. What came before Sivir sat alone in the royal war chamber, stripped of armor, wrapped in a dark robe. Her elbows on the map table where so many battles had been planned and lost. The door opened behind her. She didn't look up. I said I didn't want interruptions. Charles stepped in anyway, bruised and still limping. I'm not an interruption. She closed her eyes. Of course it was him.